All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon and happy Friday, everybody. I hope you guys are well. It's my favorite time of the week, my weekly wrap-up live stream. And of course, you guys know it is Jobs Day today. And as we often do on our Friday non-farm payrolls report day, is we analyze the data, we look between the lines, and we try to figure out what is the jobs report really telling us. And guys, there's this trend that I have noticed over the last several months. You're going to recognize some familiar themes in this show: loss of full-time jobs, part-time jobs being what they are, multiple job holders, big differences between the household and the establishment survey. And the differences are so big now that I'm actually starting to see the mainstream acknowledge them. Thanks, guys. You're only a year and a half late to the show. Nice of you to join us. Make yourselves comfortable. Finally realizing, hey, this big gap. And this gap is beautifully illustrated by this chart I saw from Longview Economics on Twitter today, at LView Economics on Twitter, should you feel so inclined. And this chart, very well done. Shout out to Longview. What you're looking at here is, first of all, this data is keyed to the beginning of January 2023. So 100 equals what the jobs levels were in 2023. The red line is showing the jobs gained or lost according to the household survey, the one that counts people filling jobs. And then the black and the blue lines are showing the non-farm payrolls, i.e. the jobs number, the establishment survey that counts jobs filled, and the ADP private payrolls, which is a very similar data point. Now, these lines are supposed to be measuring the same thing, but we have slightly different collection methods, and they measure them at slightly different points. And obviously, we're seeing a huge difference here. And as Longview Economics pointed out in his tweet, which one do we believe? Do we believe the 3 million jobs that have been added according to the non-farms payrolls, the establishment survey? Oh, my jobs numbers are so great. Do we believe that? Or do we believe the red line that shows jobs have gone precisely nowhere for over a year now? And not only that, we've lost full-time jobs and replaced them with BS low-paying part-time jobs. Now, I know most of you guys out there live on planet Earth in the real world, and like me, you know the economy is not as good as it is being made out to be right now. It just isn't. And as I look at this, I see so many overlaps to a very famous case of human error. Now, you guys know me. You know I used to be a nuclear engineer. I worked in nuclear power for 15 years. And part of working in commercial nuclear power, we were required by law every 2 years and as part of our initial training to study the events of the 3 Mile Island accident. So I have been through training on the 3 Mile accident 8 different times in my 15 years in nuclear power. I've studied this event, and I see so many similarities to the human mistakes at 3 Mile Island and these data points in the jobs numbers and what the Fed is doing at them. And I'm going to tell you the story, and we're going to get a little nerdy here. Forgive me for this, guys, but I promise you there are parallels here. All right. So you guys are familiar with 3 Mile Island. Maybe you've seen the China syndrome, but what actually happened at 3 Mile Island? You had the plant scrammed. It shut down, as plants often do. You had some feed water valves hung up. It tripped off the pumps. The reactor shut itself down. It was not a normal day, but it was a rather regular occurrence. The plant should have been fine. All right. These kind of things have happened before. The problem was a valve called the PORV, the pilot operated relief valve, stuck open. And that's ultimately what led to the meltdown of the reactor. Now imagine your hot water heater is the reactor. You ever see that little surge tank on the top of your hot water heater, especially if you're on city water? You probably have a surge tank. That's like the pressurizer at a pressurized water reactor. It makes sure it keeps the pressure in the reactor relatively constant. And then if the reactor overpressurizes, you have a relief valve like you do on your hot water heater that lets the hot water out. Well, that relief valve, the pilot operated relief valve at 3 Mile Island, stuck open. It opened like it was supposed to, and when it was time to close, it didn't work. But the operators didn't know that, because the indicator on that valve that told the operators if it was open and closed didn't actually measure the valve's position. It measured the control signal that was being sent to the valve. In other words, operators didn't understand what their instrumentation was actually telling them. Now, on top of that, operators had indicators elsewhere in the plant that that valve wasn't working right. There was high temperature in the discharge line coming out of that valve when there shouldn't have been. If the valve was closed, there shouldn't have been hot water flowing through it, so they should have had a low temperature. But operators chose to ignore that data point. Also, you had other indicators elsewhere in the plant. You had the reactor water drain tank or the reactor coolant drain tank, basically where that valve drained to, started to fill up. You had high temperatures in that tank. Operators ignored that information. And then you had rising water levels in the reactor building sump when that tank overflowed. And the only thing that can cause that is a large amount of water coming from somewhere. Operators chose to ignore that data point. And they said, no, the indicator says the valve is closed. We should be fine. The reactor operators did not trust their instrumentation. And the one piece of instrumentation they did trust, they didn't understand what it was really telling them. And so when the reactor started to boil and it wasn't supposed to, and steam bubbles started to form in the coolant lines, the reactor coolant pumps had steam bubbles flowing through them. And I don't know if you've ever heard a cavitating pump before. It sounds like it's got marbles going through it. It makes all kinds of racket. It vibrates like hell, and it destroys pumps. Well, the reactor operators saw a high level in the reactor and the pressurizer. They're like, well, I guess we shut down the pumps now to keep them from destroying themselves. And that was the worst possible thing to do when you're experiencing a big loss of coolant accident. When they shut down the pumps, no more water into the reactor, the fuel melted. And they didn't realize it until hours later what was happening. Now, another funny thing about what happened at TMI is the exact same thing had happened at another plant in Ohio called Davis-Besse just 2 years earlier. And a very sharp reactor operator at that plant who actually possessed the capacity for abstract thought and wasn't just a mindless procedure following automaton, actually understood what was happening, broke with procedures and ordered the closing of a manual valve that prevented that meltdown. But because that plant was run by corporate imbeciles, they never shared the information about what had happened with other reactors, other plants. And so the guys at TMI didn't know what was happening. All right, so that was some pretty high-level nuclear stuff. But you have some very common human error themes here. You have not trusting your instrumentation. You have not understanding what your instrumentation is really telling you, drawing incorrect conclusions based on that flawed information. And then, of course, the failure to learn from previous mistakes all culminated with the disaster at 3 Mile Island. I think the Fed is doing the same thing, looking at these recent jobs reports and saying, all clear, let's cut rates. They're not thinking about what their instrumentation is really telling them, and they're going to make inflation worse. And guys, inflation is the real problem here. Inflation is why unemployment is rising, because people can't afford the cost of living. They're not eating out. They're not shopping. They're not taking vacations. And that's why we're losing jobs. And what is the Fed going to do? They're going to cut rates with stocks and Bitcoin and gold and everything else at all-time highs. They're going to make inflation worse. They're going to do exactly what the operators at 3 Mile Island did. Shut off the pumps at a time when you need them most. The Fed is going to increase inflation at a time when they're supposed to be fighting it. They're going to bring inflation back just like they did in 1980 when Paul Volcker cut interest rates too soon and was forced to walk that back. The overlaps between 3 Mile Island and what the Fed is about to do are just everywhere today. We're going to go over some of those. We're going to look at what the instrumentation is telling us and the message we should be getting from that instrumentation. But before we do that, I got to bring my buddy Mish in here, and we're going to talk about this because, Mish, you are a fellow nuke. What do you think of my analogy here with TMI and what the Fed is doing? Am I missing something?
So at that pinnacle of my career, I controlled 2 different naval reactors. And so the head of the reactor itself was on watch, answered to me in a different spot. So I actually came all the way from low blow, taking temperatures of air conditioning ducts all the way up to running it. So I kind of hit every step on the way up. Almost. There's 1 or 2 I missed. But so yeah, it's I have quite a thing with the regulatory commission and how they do and don't do things. Our version, which is a little different than the civilian version, but yeah. I would like to point out one thing. We talked about the household versus unemployment surveys, the 2 surveys. Someone asked me in chat, which one do I like? And we talked a little about, are you going to talk about the answering percentages?
Yeah, that's a great point. Go ahead, address it, man.
So there's two surveys, right? They both go through BLS. One is the household survey, which is, hey, you got a job today? Is it at McDonald's? What's going on? The other one is, hey, HR, send us the report. Well, that report that's supposed to coming from businesses has gone from like 60% down to 30%. So what they're doing is they're trying to extrapolate what the responses are from that 30%. And I think their math is way wrong. And I kind of lean more towards the household survey.
So that is an excellent point. And you're right. It's the failure of the operators, like at 3 Mile Island, to understand what the instrumentation was actually measuring, right? Like that the pilot operated relief valve. The guys had the signal that the valve was closed, but it didn't actually measure the position of the valve. It just measured the control signal. They didn't understand what they were looking at. And with the establishment survey, they're drawing these conclusions. They're saying, well, we said 227,000 jobs added according to the establishment survey, but they don't realize how many of those 227,000 jobs have just been calculated into existence because the response rate is so low that they're just kind of filling in the blanks based on what it should be. It's not really telling them what they think it's telling them. It's poorly designed instrumentation, just like the
Well, it's
poorly
like
designed.
taking a 10-story building, finding out what's on floor 1, 2, and 3, and then filling out 4 through 10 based on what you found on 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
So
now another contributor, we're getting in more into reactor physics here. But the reactors at TMI and the operators at Davis-Besse, all these guys were trained that you can't have a high level in the pressurizer and low reactor pressure. Right? And again, we're getting into like reactor physics here, but they were trained that it's not possible, that you can't have one and the other. And the instrumentation at TMI was very poorly designed. They didn't actually measure the water level inside the reactor. They measured the water level in the pressurizer, like the surge tank in your hot water heater, and they backfit what was going on in the reactor based on that. And that's kind of like what's going on, like you said, Mish, with the poor response rate in the establishment survey. They're getting
funny thing about pressurized reactors, they act like steam generators. And when you take steam off of them, the level actually goes up.
Yes.
And that is also one of the problems. So they were bleeding off steam, which causes level to rise. So they thought level was rising in the reactor when it was actually just steam demand from something that shouldn't have a steam demand.
So, and that was what they were taught couldn't happen. Because as the reactor pressure dropped, you had steam bubbles formed in the reactor. Well, steam is less dense than water, right? So the water was expanding into steam. That was actually displacing water, and it was forcing the water level in the pressurizer to rise. So operators thought they had plenty of water in the reactor because pressurizer level equals reactor level. But really what they were measuring was the reactor level was dropping, but the steam was pushing water out of the way into the pressurizer, giving a false signal. Again, the thing with the establishment survey here, they're getting the wrong information. They're not understanding what their instruments are telling them. And that exact thing had happened at Davis-Besse. 2 years earlier, the same thing, the same valve, the same model had stuck open. The same result had happened. Operators were confused on what their instrumentation was telling them. But this guy, I wrote down his name. I can't remember his name. Mike Deravin was the name of the operator at Davis-Besse. This guy should be a freaking hero, by the way. He actually realized when he saw the rising level in the reactor building sump, which meant a huge amount of water was coming from somewhere, he had his eureka moment, and he ordered the closure of that valve, and he prevented a meltdown. Now, we could have learned from what Mike Deravin did. We could have learned our lesson, but we didn't communicate. We didn't learn from our lessons. And we continued teaching people that you can't have high reactor level, or you can't have low reactor pressure and high pressurizer level at the same time. Kind of like all of our economists are trained on this silly thing called the Phillips curve that tells them you can't have high unemployment and high inflation at the same time. It can't exist. Even though in the 1970s, that exact thing happened. We called it stagflation. All of our economics universities, our whole industry is trained on Keynesian economics, which is fundamentally broken. And we have failed to learn the lessons of Keynesian's failure in the 1970s when Paul Volcker lowered rates too soon. And we are repeating those mistakes. And this is why everybody's like, all clear, let's go cut rates to fight it, to help the employment problem. And don't worry, inflation is defeated. Inflation is the problem. It never went away. The reason why unemployment is rising is because of inflation, because people can't afford things they used to buy, the services they used to consume. And so the people whose job it is to provide those things are being pushed out of work. And so if inflation does come back, they're going to make the unemployment problem worse. The Keynesians are not mentally equipped to deal with the situation that they're facing right now. So we're going to shrink my big melon of a head, and we're going to look at what the instrumentation is actually telling us and how the Fed is getting the wrong message from that stuff. And Mish, thank you for both your service and your nuclear expertise. It's one of the things that was crazy when I met Mish at that event in Denver all those years ago. I was like, oh, a fellow nuke, get out of here. What are the odds that I meet a fellow nuke that's also into YouTube, that's also into finance at this event? And, well, the rest is history, I guess.
I poofed.
You poofed out of nowhere. Yeah. Who poofed? Mish did. All right, guys, let's look at the S&P 500. Okay, here's our first indicator that inflation is not vanquished. The S&P 500 above 6,000. If inflation was vanquished, why are asset prices continuing to rise on a daily basis? 6,086, not quite an all-time high. Yes, no, wait. No, it is an all-time high. We're going to close probably at another all-time high. If only there were signs that inflation was not vanquished. If only our indication was telling us that inflation wasn't vanquished. Now look at the Dow Jones. By the way, these are daily candles going back to about the beginning of the year. Now the Dow is not at an all-time high, but it's only a few hundred points short of it. 44,600 for the Dow. It's down 160 today, but it is pretty much flat for the week here. Again, if only there were indicators that inflation hadn't gone away. And of course, the NASDAQ, all-time high, 19,836, up another 136 points today. If only there were signs that we still had some inflation. Asset prices rising, guys. Inflation hits very predictably. You get an increase in the money supply, and that money flows into assets, right? What do they call that? The Cantillon effect. Those closest to the money printer benefit most. First, it flows into asset prices like stocks. Then it rises in consumer prices. And last but not least, it hits wages, right? We're already seeing the rise in asset prices. Meanwhile, the U.S. dollar, a little bit stronger today, up 28 basis points, 106.01. The dollar was essentially flat for the week, maybe, a little bit higher than we closed on Friday, but not by much. Looking over at the bond market right now, we've got yields are lower pretty much across the board, the 30-year being the one exception. That is unchanged at 4.337. The 10-year, 4.151. That's down almost 3 points today. The 2-year, 4.102, down about 4.5 points. And the 1 month is down big at almost 9 points lower, 4.444 for the 1 month T-bill here, guys. The market is now pricing in the near certainty of the Fed cutting rates. All the commentary from the Fed whisperers like Nick T, he was out today. They're all saying Fed's going to cut. They're saying, despite the growth in the jobs numbers, the rise in the unemployment gives us all the cover we need to cut rates. Inflation is the problem. Inflation is why unemployment is rising. Cutting rates makes inflation worse. In other words, they are not listening to what their instrumentation is telling them, and they're going to make a mistake. Gold, meanwhile, 2,635. Again, guys, gold above $2,600. If only there were signs that inflation was not vanquished, right? Gold near all-time highs. Silver, $31. That's down 32 cents today, or 1% lower, but still silver above $30. If only there were signs we had inflation still. Copper's up 0.1%. Platinum is down 0.75%. Palladium is down about 1%. And WTI crude oil down 1.75% today, $67.09. That's about $1.20 lower. And another sign of if only there were signs, Bitcoin back above 100,000. We're at 102,000 even right now, up by about 5% today. Looks like recovering from that pullback here. That spinning top candle yesterday is pretty ugly. I like to see the green today because I was worried that might be a sign of a reversal. But right now, Bitcoin is looking like it is heading higher as well. Again, guys, all these asset prices, all-time highs almost across the board. Are we really acting like there's no inflation? Are we really acting like inflation is defeated? No, we're just working on the next round of it. And I just want to say welcome very much to Mr. D, I'm going to try to pronounce this. Deseo Suho. Did I say it right? Deseo Suho? How about Des? Can I call you Des? Des, thank you so much, and welcome to the Melonheads. Thank you for supporting the channel, sir. I apologize for my lack of pronunciation. I just don't get out much, but I appreciate the support of the channel. And thank you to Mr. Vacation Time, a.k.a. Sloth. What's going on, Sloth? He says Biden swore he wouldn't pardon Hunter nor drop the pro. There's the Hunter thing, but he did. Think their numbers are also a lie when we get true discovery under Trump. I think Trump would have pardoned Hunter also. I don't want to turn this into the Hunter Biden show, but I think he would have pardoned Hunter anyway because Trump doesn't want his children prosecuted when he gets out of office, which is what they were probably going to do. I think that was going to happen anyway. Look, Hunter's a degenerate. Would I have the guy over for dinner? No. Do I want anything to do with him? No. In the grand scheme of things, we need to get away from this concept of prosecuting our political opponents, guys. It's just bad practice. That's banana republic shit, and we need to stop doing it. Yes, that is a gray area, and that is as you say, a moral dilemma because no, nobody should be above the law. But at the same time, prosecuting political opponents is a very dangerous, slippery slope, and down that path lies all kinds of mayhem. So, I mean, we could debate this until we're red in the face. There is no right or wrong answer. It's a dilemma. It's a choice between two lousy options. Thank you very much, Vacation Time, for supporting the channel. That is my very much uneducated take on the Hunter story. Now, let's get into the crux of it, all right? We're going to look at table A9 as we often do on a Friday after a jobs report because that's where we get into the household survey. Now, before we do that, for those who didn't catch the morning show this morning, total non-farm employment increased by 227,000 in the month of November. That is the headline jobs added number. That's a number everybody's like, oh, great, the economy's humming along, everything is good. We also got a combined, I believe it was 56,000 revisions upward to the previous 2 months of jobs reports. So all in all, you're looking at about 280 some odd thousand jobs, 283,000 jobs added if you count the upward revisions. That being said, the unemployment rate rose to 4.2, almost 4.3% from the previous level of 4.1. Now, let's take a look at some of these numbers in the household survey. As Miss mentioned earlier, you get the establishment survey, which counts companies hiring people, and then you get the household survey, which counts people working. Now, they're supposedly measuring the same thing, but they tell us two wildly different things. And this is one of those three Mile Island analogies here. People are not understanding what their instrumentation is actually telling them. So when we look at the household survey, table A9, and the best information, in my opinion, in the jobs reports, it's always in this table, table A9. We're going to scroll past all the age demographics and the male-female stuff and the married and single, and we're going to look at the seasonally adjusted numbers for the last 2 months, starting with full-time workers. All right, now seasonally adjusted, we had 133,496,000 full-time workers last month. All right, these numbers are shown in thousands here, so the 133,000, that's really 133 million. This month, we got 133,385,000. All right, so we have seen a big loss of full-time workers. Seasonally adjusted, we lost 111,000 full-time jobs in the last month. And guys, again, if you've been following the channel for a while, we've seen this month after month after month. Full-time jobs are going away, and with them go the good pay, the good benefits, the paid leave, the time off, mom and dad home to kiss the kids goodnight and make the Little League games. That is gone. We are continuing to bleed out full-time jobs. It's been happening for over a year. Now, if you look at the non-seasonally adjusted numbers, they are even worse. Whoa. Non-seasonally adjusted, 133,887,000 last month. Now 133,364,000, a loss of 523,000 full-time jobs. 500,000 people fewer working full-time jobs versus last month. Holy crap. That is dreadful. And again, we're seeing all this like, oh, you know, the signs are the labor market remains strong despite some signs of weakness. No, this is not some signs of weakness. That's 500,000 people losing full-time jobs in a month. That ain't a sign of weakness. That's the floor giving out from underneath your feet. Now, the part-time jobs, we've seen a steady increase in part-time jobs over the last few months, but even that number sharply lower this month, back on the side of seasonally adjusted numbers, 27.934 million. And now here we are sitting at 27,666,000. Uh-oh, sign of the beast there in the seasonally adjusted numbers. Guys, that's a loss of 268,000 part-time jobs. So not only on the seasonally adjusted basis, not only did we lose 111,000 full-time, but we lost over 250,000 part-time too. Holy crap, guys. Over like 370, almost 380,000 jobs going away just between the full-time and the part-time. Where is this some signs of weakness in the labor market thing coming from? There's a ton of jobs going away here. Now, on a seasonally adjusted or a non-seasonally adjusted basis, we actually did add a few part-time jobs. It says we added 41,000 if you take away seasonally adjustment. So I'm not reading too much into the non-seasonally adjusted numbers on the part-time thing there. We've got a seasonal adjustment factor of almost 300,000. That's pretty big. But any way you look at it, the full-time and the part-time numbers, especially these numbers over here, really bad numbers for this month of November. And if you go over to the multiple job holders category, now you're starting to see, again, you really got to think about what your instrumentation is telling us. Like that valve at 3 Mile Island, that's only telling you the command signal going to the valve, not the actual position of the valve. Look at where we did add jobs. Multiple job holders. A month ago, it was 8,305,000. This month, 8,580,000. Whoa. We added 235,000 multiple job holders. Guys, that's almost 250,000 people had to get a second job in the last month. Now, is that a sign of health of the labor market? Well, you might say it is, because at least they were able to find jobs. Okay, that's good. But that also means, why are people getting second jobs? Probably because their first job sucks and doesn't pay them enough, and the cost of living has gone up so much that now they have to get that second job to make ends meet. It's not a sign of prosperity. It is a sign of almost 250,000 desperate people who are now working their hands to the bone at a second job just to make ends meet. This is not a sign of a thriving economy here. Now, when you take away the seasonal adjustment, those numbers were pretty similar. Seasonally adjusted, we added 275,000 multiple job holders. So that number looks really, really bad here, guys. This is not a strong jobs report, not by any measure. Now, the last category that I often look at in table A9 is the self-employed unincorporated workers. That's your Uber drivers. That's your gig work. All right, self-employed unincorporated. And that one, we've been adding quite a bit over the last year or so, but I'm seeing this one even starting to go away here. We went from 9,838,000 to 9,816,000. So, we lost, what's that, about 22,000 on the not seasonally adjusted number there. And if you go to the seasonally adjusted number, even worse. I'm sorry, that was the seasonally adjusted number. We lost 22,000. If you go to the not seasonally adjusted number, we lost 163,000 gig workers. Again, guys, the household survey was really, really bad here. And, I have to bring back this document here, this image that was posted by, Longview Economics. How can we have these two things that are supposedly measuring the same thing? They're supposed to be measuring the job market, the unemployment rate. How can two instruments telling us exactly the same thing be so different? How can you have high temperatures in the discharge line leading to your reactor coolant drain tank if the port valve is closed? Maybe the port valve isn't closed. Maybe there's some big flaw in the establishment survey. Like Mish pointed out, the fact that there's such a low response rate to the establishment survey, but we're letting bureaucrats just fill in the blanks with their own cockamamie math. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe that's the valve really being stuck open. But this instrumentation, guys, two data points that are supposed to be telling us the same thing, and they have been moving in opposite directions for over a year. And the people making decisions based on this data are just humming along, whistling past the graveyard, acting like everything is fine. It clearly is not. And I don't have to tell you guys about your lived experience. I'm willing to bet, if you're watching this, your lived experience over the last year has been a hell of a lot closer to this red line than it has been to the blue or the black.
Well,
and
another
if it
way
hasn't,
to think
congratulations.
Of this, well, another way to think of this is, when you whether or not you're going to fill out a piece of paperwork, sometimes depends on if you're doing good or doing bad. You typically don't want to tell people you're doing bad, right? The government's kind of not like that. or not the government, corporations don't like to say they're not doing well on paper. So they may just not say anything, right? So the bottom 70% isn't responding because it sucks. And you have the good 30% responding right now. So there's a couple different ways to look at this.
Yeah, you don't want to people are less inclined to share bad news, right? Like people rarely take pictures of things they want to forget and post them on Facebook, right? You only get the best, rosiest version of somebody's life when you look on Facebook. You don't see, the drinking problem. You don't see the extramarital affairs. You don't see all that other crap that goes on in people's lives.
Right up to the point that you do, because it bleeds out and all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, when you do see it, it goes downhill real freaking fast, doesn't it? Now, the other thing you mentioned about how companies, they don't want to share the bad news. Mish, that's another analogy, another throwback to 3 Mile Island, right? The Davis-Besse plant, the guys that ran that plant did not want to share that they had almost had a reactor meltdown at Davis-Besse, that their poor valve had stuck open. And were it not for a reactor operator, again, the guy's name, he should be a hero. We should all have his name memorized, and yet we don't. What the heck was the guy's name again? Thank you, Mike Deravin. Mike Deravin, who broke with standard operating procedure, broke with his own training, but recognized what was happening and prevented a meltdown. If it was not for him, the same thing would have happened at Davis-Besse, and they did not share that information. And so maybe the operators in the control room at TMI, if they had read Mike Deravin's story, would have recognized, hey, this is exactly what happened. And that's why one of the lessons learned coming out of 3 Mile Island was they created the Institute of Nuclear Power Operations, which is like a private industry self-regulatory body. And they force every plant to share every accident with all the other plants. They have to write up reports when things go wrong. They have to send them to the other plants, and the other plants have to submit written responses to those reports and submit their plans to make sure it doesn't happen at their plant. Sharing of operating experience is now paramount in the nuclear industry because the failure that happened at TMI had already happened 2 years earlier and could have been prevented. Again, these human error signs, these are not unique to finance. They're not unique to nuclear power. These are human qualities, human psychology. These are things that we do, and they transcend the lines between industries. And I can see these same mistakes happening, not to mention the freaking arrogance. I mean, Jesus, spend a few minutes on FinTwit. The arrogance that is on display in FinTwit will blow your mind. Talk about people that are just sleepwalking into the abyss. Oh, my God. These people, well, that's how you get people buying Hawk Tuah coin, because of that. Oh, yeah, it only goes up. I think the tokenomics of Hawk Tuah coin look great. Okay, good luck with that. Ends up being a scam. I just want to say thank you very much.
If the return is too good to believe, it probably is too good to believe.
Yeah. It almost always is. And I said that about DeFi in 2021 and 22, and a lot of people laughed at me. You're like, okay, we'll have fun staying poor. And then, oh, my money's stranded in BlockFi. Well, if only somebody had warned you about that. Jesse B, thank you, sir, for the super chat and the support of the channel. He says, have you had a chance to look at the total Bitcoin volume versus this price pump? No, I have not, Jesse. Volume is historically low for this price move. Well, low volume and volatility do tend to go hand in hand. And while I haven't looked at the volume numbers, I can tell you this crazy candle from yesterday, that has all the son of a gun. Let me draw it. There we go. That looks an awful lot like low volume right there. When you get big wicks on a candle like that, big intraday swings up and down, right? That kind of volatility only comes from low volume. So I'm not terribly surprised to see that. Although I would add, Bitcoin has always been incredibly volatile. I haven't studied Bitcoin volume, so I can't really, comment on that based on any kind of experience or anything. But it doesn't surprise me given what we saw yesterday, Jesse. And as far as the pump goes, we've got MicroStrategy doing what they're doing. I'm sure that's playing a big role in it as well. MicroStrategy and their infinite money glitch. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. That being said, I don't think the Bitcoin pump is over. I really don't. You were going to say something, Mitch? Oh, you look like you were. Sorry. But thank you very much, Jesse B. I appreciate the super chat and the support of the channel. And let's move on a little bit to some of the things that we're getting today. First of all, we got this one from Nick Timoreos, a.k.a. the Fed Whisperer. And guys, when you read a tweet from Nick Timiraos, at this point, you can pretty much just assume it's coming directly from Jerome Powell. That may not be true all the time, but when Powell wants something leaked to the press, Nick Timiraos is usually the conduit through which that information flows. So when I see this come out within a few minutes of the jobs report today, this is telling me this is what J. Powell is thinking. The unemployment rate, arguably the best summary statistic in the monthly jobs report, ticked up to 4.2% in November. It's actually very close to 4.3%, as Nick alludes to here. He says, unrounded, it was 4.246, leaving it very close to the recent high of 4.253 recorded in July. In other words, unemployment rate is the highest it's been in a long time. Job growth in the establishment survey has been fine. I think you need to be sitting in a burning room with a cup of tea in your hand when you say that, Nick. But, okay, this is fine. Job growth in the establishment survey has been fine. Again, are you sure that port valve is closed? Are you sure that relief valve isn't stuck open, Nick? I'm just saying, you got a big difference in your data points here. But the household survey showed the share of Americans, including 25 to 54-year-olds, in other words, everybody who works, who were working in November, was down from a year ago. The number of unemployed at 7.145 million was also close to the July high of 7.163 million. And I hate when people post unemployment charts that include the COVID spike, because that COVID spike was so big, it hides a trend you might otherwise notice if you didn't have this stupid spike making everything else appear flat. But look, the unemployment level, it's rising. And it may not be rising terribly fast, but it is rising. And you know what else is also going up? Core inflation is also rising. If it wasn't for lower oil prices, CPI would be way higher right now. For the last several months, we've seen core inflation start to go higher again. And the Keynesians tell us all the time, you're not supposed to have that. You're not supposed to have inflation going up at the same time unemployment goes up. The Phillips curve says one goes up, the other goes down. Just like the operators said, wait, you're not supposed to have low reactor pressure and high pressurizer level. That can't coexist. Well, we had two very famous cases where it did happen. All right. So you can say my training says this can't happen, or my book says this can't happen, or you could trust what your instrumentation is telling you and see it happening in front of your freaking face and believe it. Unemployment is rising and inflation is rising. That was from Nick Timiraos today. And we also got this one from Anna Wong. She's the chief economist at Bloomberg. Anna Wong is saying median duration of unemployment has increased meaningfully. That's interesting here. The duration of unemployment. So while the level is only going up slow, the people who are unemployed for a lot longer. We are in a very different macro landscape than the first Trump term. She works at Bloomberg, so she's got her Trump goggles on here. If the current status quo of limited layoffs and limited hiring, translating to longer duration of unemployment, goes on long enough, one can see this weird phenomenon where jobless claims data move in opposite direction of unemployment, and a whole bunch of forecasting models will fail. Now, that's an unusual moment of, I don't know if I want to say self-awareness, but when Anna Wong is talking here, I'm kind of hearing a little bit of Mike Derivin, that operator at the Davis-Besse plant. You know, she's saying, hey, wait a minute, if we're seeing the duration of unemployment rise, then all of these models that we Keynesians use throughout, economics to try to figure out where the economy is going, we don't really account for that. We don't account for slowing job losses, but increasing duration of unemployment, which means rising unemployment over time, albeit slowly. And she's saying all these previous methods we've used to establish what the model for what the economy will do will fail in that scenario. A lot like Mike Derivin realized, hey, level in the pressurizer and reactor pressure shouldn't both, one shouldn't be going down, the other shouldn't be going up, but yet the model is failing. Our training is failing us here. It's time to think beyond what we've been programmed to think and actually ask ourselves what's really happening in the economy. Now, none of these economists are actually saying the reason why unemployment is rising is because of inflation. I think pretty much everybody, almost universally, is saying the reason why unemployment is rising is because of the Fed's tightening cycle. But again, I'm going to look at the instrumentation and I'm going to challenge that assertion, because look at this. Look at what this gauge is telling us. To me, this is the temperature gauge in the pilot operating relief valve's discharge line. All right. Okay, I get it. The valve is closed. The Fed is tightening. Well, then why do we have a high temperature in the line? Why is the money supply growing? If we're really fighting inflation, if inflation is really defeated, somebody explain to me how the money supply has risen by almost $1 trillion since last year. If the Fed has destroyed all this money, where is this money coming from? All right. Yeah, I get it. Your training tells you Fed tightening cycle equals inflation going down equals money supply shrinking, but that is not what your money supply gauge is telling you. That's telling you it's going up. Maybe we need to rethink these models. Like Anna Wong is saying, hey, our models fail in this scenario. Did you ever ask yourself why your models are failing? Maybe it's because inflation isn't really defeated. Now, another thing, we talked about this, the failure to share the operating experience at 3 Mile Island. That played a big role in that event. And guys, we have seen this exact scenario play out before. Another parallel to TMI, the failure to learn from our previous mistakes. Take a look at this. This is the Fed funds rate going all the way back to 1978. All right. This is the 70s inflation crisis. And here's Paul Volcker fighting inflation all through the late 70s. They're raising the Fed funds rate. By the way, what's the Fed funds rate right now? Is it like 4.5, I think, 4.5%? 4.5 to 4.75 is the target rate for the Fed. Back in the 1970s, the Fed funds rate peaked at 19.1%. All right. So again, when we say like, oh yeah, we're doing everything we can to fight inflation, obviously not, because we did a whole hell of a lot more in the 70s. Now you'll notice here, look at this dip in 1980. And I wasn't really aware of this until my buddy John Galt over at Macro Edge mentioned this last week when I was on the Macro Edge show and we were talking about Paul Volcker. And, he bought this up, and I was in diapers in 1980. So, I didn't have the memory of this. And I went back and looked, and sure enough, he's right. Paul Volcker
I was going to Willie Nelson concerts.
You were at a Willie concert? I'm sure that was an experience. I've never been to a Willie concert. So, but I hear good things. Now, did they talk much about the Fed funds rate at the Willie Nelson concert in the 70s? Probably not. Probably not, man. But
there was an economics of sense, but probably not what we want to talk about here.
Yeah, probably not. But look at that big dip there, guys, right in 1980. Volcker started cutting rates. He started cutting too soon. And he cut big time. And look what he had to do. He had to undo it. He had to go right back up. Volcker cut rates starting in April of 1980, 17.61%. He took us all the way down to 9% in July. Huge rate cuts. And then he had to bring us back up even higher. Now, all the while he was doing that, look at what CPI did over the same time frame. He started cutting in April of 1980. CPI was still over 14% back then. Now, this was in 1980s CPI measurement. All right, so Paul Volcker started cutting rates while inflation was still 14%. Can you freaking believe it? Now, everybody considers Paul Volcker to be this big hero, but later on in 2016, which I think was only shortly before his death, Volcker would come back and admit that, yeah, he moved too early. He cut too early, and he had to undo it. And, of course, that led to the double dip recessions of 1980 and 1982. Now, what really caused those recessions? Was it the Fed rate hikes? Maybe. Or maybe it was the cost of living that people could no longer afford. Maybe that's what caused the inflation. I see Jerome Powell making the same mistake. Much like at 3 Mile Island, that port valve had stuck open at Davis-Besse 2 years earlier, and the operators didn't recognize it until it was almost too late. But thanks to Mike, again, what's the guy's name? Damn, Mike Darravin. Thank you, Mike Darravin. Thanks to him catching that, they didn't melt down the reactor. If they had shared his story, if they had learned the lesson from Davis-Besse, 3 Mile Island never would have melted down. But they didn't learn their lesson. Keynesians didn't learn their lesson from the 1970s. The Keynesians still think you can't have rising inflation and rising unemployment. Keynesians are wrong, like the Keynesians were wrong in the 70s. Their models don't work. They are refusing to adapt. And we're going to be the ones who pay the price for this. Powell's going to go cut rates again. He's not realizing the reason these job reports suck so bad, and at least they're finally starting to admit that these jobs reports suck, but the reason they suck so bad is because of the inflation, not because of the Fed's rate hikes. It's because people can't afford the cost of living. And if you cut rates, you're going to make the cost of living go up again. And you can already see it because stocks, Bitcoin, gold, all-time highs. The asset prices are already rising, anticipating that. And that's why stocks were up today.
Speaking of stocks, you want to go run through them? I think they're closed.
Market is closed. Let's see where we finished the week at. The S&P finished the week at 6,090. Yeah, good thing we beat inflation, Mitch. 6,090, up another 15 points or 0.25%. The Dow closed at 44,610. Yep, no inflation here. Not quite an all-time high for the Dow. That's down about 149 points. And the NASDAQ closed at 19,846. New record for the NASDAQ. Tech stocks number only ever go up, 143 points higher for the day. Now, the big, giant, freaking cherry on top, the best thing, the dumbest thing I read all freaking week. Mish, you found this one, and it was just glorious. All right. You want to talk about the failure of Keynesian economics laid bare. Oh, my God, this will go down in history as the dumbest thing ever written. Maybe not. Maybe not. I've read some pretty dumb things. World economy has exited the boom-bust cycle, according to BlackRock. That's right, guys. There's no longer any such thing as economic cycles. From now on, stocks only ever go higher. That's what they're saying. Somebody better find some freaking wood to knock on real fast around here, because
this reminds me of stuff that if you rolled back to like 1880, you would have stories about how we're not going to do the boom burst or the boom bust cycle anymore. They've been talking about this in economics for a while, trying to get out of this cycle. And then they had the worst depression ever in 1880. I think they had like 2 back-to-back in 5 years or something. It was bad.
Yeah, this ship can't sink, Mish.
Yeah.
Right? And or we can't have low reactive pressure and a high level in the pressurizer at the same time. It just can't happen. The economy no longer has boom-bust cycles. But where do you see the reasons? I just, oh my God, these people are so one-dimensional. BlackRock has said the global economy has exited the cycle of boom-bust due to a fundamental shift driven by the emergence of mega forces, including artificial intelligence. By the way, who the hell uses words like mega forces? All right. Is this a freaking Mighty Morphin Power Rangers episode, or is this a Market Watch article? Mega forces. Who says this? Who comes up with this shit? It's in its 2025 global outlook. BlackRock said it believes the world economy is currently in the process of being entirely reshaped by the emergence of 5 new mega forces, including the shift to net zero carbon emissions, which isn't freaking happening, geopolitical fragmentation, like it's a good thing, demographic trends, i.e. nobody can afford to have babies anymore, the digitization of finance, and AI, which is, of course, a gigantic freaking bubble. The fund manager, which controls $11.5 trillion worth of assets, i.e. our money, said it now believes the economic transmission has seen the global economy break away from historical trends that have seen markets go through cycles of boom bust for centuries. In other words, the people we've all trusted with $11.5 trillion of our assets are telling us it can never go down. Doesn't that make you feel great? Oh my God. 2024 has reinforced our view that we are not in a business cycle. AI has been a major market driver. Inflation fell without a growth slowdown. That's not true. And typical recession signals failed, the asset manager said. Wait, what? Typical recession signals failed? Like, as in we're not trusting our instrumentation? If only there were parallels to the human error that caused 3 Mile Island. That's very interesting. So yeah, guys, because solar panels and windmills and because of Sam Altman's chatbots, good news, the boom-bust cycle, which governs the expansion and contraction of everything in the freaking world of nature, no longer applies. So like some kind of like totally effed up Keynesian freaking Pokemon, these guys have evolved from it's different this time to it's different from now on. This is the dumbest thing I have read all year. And I've read some dumb shit this year, guys. And I think this is a pretty good headline to wrap the show up on. I got a few more, you guys, I got to get through. Wait, hold on. Raymond, what's going on, buddy? Raymond, thoughts and mind, says, hey, Jack, I hope you're doing well. Thank you, Raymond. I am doing well. And right back at you, sir. I hope you are doing as well. You are doing well, or as well as I am well. Thank you, Raymond.
I'm sorry if this upsets you, Raymond, but you kind of look like the full spectrum guy.
Full spectrum. I'm not sure what.
It's a YouTube personality.
Okay.
He does a bunch of. He's one of those guys that like, oh my God, World War III has started. Just kidding. We're talking about fish today.
Okay. Well, that does sound like a full spectrum, because talking about fish in World War III,
But
there's a lot in
he
between
has
there.
like 50,000 subscribers.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll try not to be totally insulted by that. We'll get to 60 by the end of the year. Yay. Thank you, Raymond. Appreciate the good vibes, sir, and the support of the channel. And someone familiar with the matter. I love how Wes takes my pet peeves and turn them into his name for the day and then makes me read it on the air. Thank you, Wes, for the laugh, as always. He says, in light of sharing the worst stories, I'd like you to share my upcoming autobiography, Someone Familiar with the Matter, How I Never Sleep, Always Have the Inside Scoop, and Always Fear for My Life, written by a man who refused to be identified as the matter was private. Yes, Wes, he is alluding to the fact that nobody ever names their sources anymore, one of the inherent failures of modern journalism. And, you know, the result of several years of people familiar with the matter is we end up with freaking headlines like it's different from now on. The boom bust cycle is now obsolete, right? Oh, my God. The arrogance on display here. Talk about like complacency. Talk about signs of a massive human error is about to occur. Look at that headline, Wes. Look at that. Thank you, sir, for supporting the channel. I appreciate that very much. So, guys, look, we kind of like, you know, maybe we dove a little deeper into Jack's nerddom and Mish's nerddom than maybe others might be comfortable with. And I was talking to Mish about this before the show started, and I was like, is this going to play or not, the TMI reference here? Like, I get it. You get it. We live in the nuke thing. Maybe we went a little over the top with it. I don't know. But, guys, Mish and I have both spent a lot of time studying famous screw-ups. And famous screw-ups are the same. Maybe you screwed up with a boat. Maybe you screwed up with a power plant. Maybe you just screwed up driving your car. But the things that cause these mistakes, the things that are built into our brains that cause us to do these things, they're universal. Finance is no different. And worse, the arrogance that makes us more vulnerable to these things runs freaking rampant in finance. And that's why when the guys in finance screw up, everybody freaking suffers. And, well, they never learn their lessons, which means they're going to repeat those failures. And I see them doing that now. Mish, you got anything you want to add, brother? Maybe anything I missed about TMI there?
Well, no, not necessarily about TMI. Just stay safe out there. You know, there's the news cycle this week was kind of rough between what was all going on out there. And we're still not out of the South Korea mess yet. We got about another 12 hours there. So just keep your head, you know, looking around. Don't get hurt.
Yeah. And, you know, one of those things, the geopolitical rifts that they mentioned in that worst article ever, they were, you know, that's an understatement. Coup in South Korea, rumors of a second one possibly happening over the weekend. I don't know what the heck happened in Romania today, but they're like, no, do over with the election because Russia. Then you got Syria is basically a failed state at this point. I don't know what's going to come out of the power vacuum there. And of course, Eastern Europe is always Eastern Europe and China is always China. It has been a pretty crazy geopolitical news cycle. And I think to think these things are not going to affect us here in the States, probably not accurate. So, guys, enjoy the good times while you got them, because there will come a day when you wish you had your current set of problems. So enjoy those. Have a good weekend. Spend time with your family. Get some stuff done for Christmas. And I just want to say thank you so much, everybody, for the super chats, for the support of the channel. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters and my magnanimous melonheads here on YouTube. You guys are awesome. Links down below to all that good stuff, should you feel so inclined. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Love you guys. Till next time, live small and dream big.